Good afternoon. I am going to call this regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole for Wednesday, March 27th, 2019 to order. My name is Andrea Jenkins. I am the chair of this committee. With me at the dais today are council members Palmisano, Johnson, Ellison, Schrader, Vice Chair Cunningham, and council members Cano, and Gordon, and Councilmember Fletcher. Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum to do our business. We have 2 items on our agenda, actually 3 items on our agenda today in addition to the committee reports. And item number 1 is the adoption of the city's visions and values as a part of our strategic and racial equity action plan. And Ms. Andrea Larson and Joyce Stevens from the City Coordinator's Office will be giving that presentation. Good afternoon, Ms. Larson.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrea Larson, Director of Strategic Management in the Coordinator's Office, and I'm joined by Joy Marsh Stevens, who leads the Coordinator's Division of Race and Equity. We're here to share the Council's proposed vision, mission, and values for adoption and to provide an update on the next steps as we work to operationalize the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan. The Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan consists of a number of components. To date, you have adopted goals in areas recommended by the Government Alliance on Race and Equity around policy, workforce, spend, data, and engagement. You've also established a set of 2019 priorities that are the focus for operationalizing progress on these goals. And today I'll review the vision, mission, and values that you have worked to develop in preparation for adoption. The first is the draft vision, which is that Minneapolis is an intentionally compassionate city where each of us can reach our full potential while caring for one another, eliminating racial disparities, improving our environment, and promoting social well-being. We lead in innovative and creative ways, focused not only on our present needs, but also the success of future generations. The draft mission is that our city government takes strategic action to address climate change, dismantle institutional injustice, and close disparities in health, housing, public safety, and economic opportunities. In partnership with residents, city leaders help to ensure all communities thrive in a safe and healthy city. The draft values are listed here. I won't read every value, but there are values around equity, safety, excellence, welcoming, stewardship, transparency, and health. Before I move on to review the adopted goals, I'll pause and see if there's any thoughts on the vision, mission, and values.
Are there any questions or comments? Councilmember Cunningham.
I just wanted to take a moment to thank the staff for helping us through this process, as well as my colleagues for those who have been a part of the process, and particularly as we've been hammering out the vision and the mission and what the draft values would be. And so I just wanted to make sure I said my thank yous because there's a lot of work that's gone into this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Are there any other comments?
Great.
Please proceed.
I'll quickly go through the goals that have been adopted before we talk about operationalizing these goals. As a reminder, the Mayor and Council adopted 8 goals listed here around economic development, public safety, housing, public services, environmental justice, built environment and transportation, public health, and arts and culture. Those in dark gray at the top are the 2019 priority areas. You also adopted additional goals around internal operations, specifically spend diversity, workforce, racially disaggregated data, and community engagement. These are new and important elements of the planning process for the city. Lastly, staff were directed to make progress on operationalizing priorities in these 3 areas, specifically increasing the number of businesses owned by POCII communities, which are, this policy area, priority area really complements and helps augment the internal goal of spending more with diverse businesses. Eliminating the disproportionate impact of violence of POCII communities and reducing evictions among POCII communities. So Joy Stevens, as I mentioned, has been doing an enormous amount of work to move these priorities forward, and so she will speak more to the work that will be coming this spring.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So we are here to talk about, I'm here to talk about the work that we've been doing around community engagement and operationalizing these external policy priority areas, both the work that I've been doing, but then also talk about the work that we've been doing within our Division of Race and Equity and in collaboration with other departments, because it's a lot of work and I certainly didn't do it by myself. I'll start with community engagement, and as you likely recall back from our study sessions last summer and last fall, when we talked about trust and transparency, NCR talked about the spectrum of engagement. So I'm going to try to categorize the engagement that we're doing along that spectrum. Specifically looking at just general community engagement that we've started through this Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan, through the initial phases of the work as we looked at our internal enterprise. We didn't do a whole lot to really talk about that work externally, since the work is pushing more externally with the specific policy areas of housing, public safety, and economic development. We've done more work to actually tell that story more clearly. So looking at our communications and engagement strategies, those along the spectrum fall into the categories of informing and consulting with community. They're really about helping educate community members about the fact that we are doing this strategic and racial equity planning process and providing space and opportunity for them to share their own lived experience as it relates to these specific engagement strategies. Each of you has a document in front of you that looks like this. It's a two-pager or two-sided one-pager that provides some themes around the engagements that we've done thus far. This work has been happening in partnership with our colleagues in CPED Long Range Planning, NCR, and Transportation Public Works. We took the initiative to align our engagement with engagement that was already planned through Public Works so that we were able to maximize community time and community voice into single types of engagement as opposed to multiple engagement opportunities. Because the Transportation Action Plan and the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan both stem from the comprehensive plan, we wanted to do this engagement together with them. So what you have is a set of summary themes that Melanie Pusinski from the Division of Race and Equity has put together based on those engagements that we've done thus far. We still have some engagements planned in partnership with Transportation Public Works, but we will also be doing another set of engagement now between now and the end of the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Planning process. In addition to those face-to-face engagements, we've also created a web page that's tied to the Race and Equity Division page in the City Coordinator's office, which provides additional context and information about the planning process, as well as a survey that we are encouraging community members, particularly those who aren't able to come out to a physical site, to come and to provide some additional content and some feedback that we can help to inform the process. The feedback that we're getting through these engagements, both with the survey, with the face-to-face engagements, we're ultimately hoping will move into the next phase of work, which I'll talk about the next level of engagement and helping to inform the deeper metric of urgency processes that we're planning for currently. So that next phase of engagement, looking at leveraging our community subject matter experts. The purpose of those engagements, again, looking back onto the spectrum of the IEP2 engagement spectrum, is really about involving and collaborating directly with those individuals who bring a level of subject matter expertise to this work. They're individuals who are currently working in the areas of evictions, they're working on violence reduction, they're working on economic development, particularly with small business. We're inviting in these individual people to help partner with staff and departments who are the process owners around these areas so that we can help collaborate and actually identify the level of solutions that we need to move the work forward, helping us understand what the data says about current practice and past practice and trends so that we can isolate out the areas within the processes that we need to be focused on. The individuals identified for these specific areas came from engagement with process owners, as well as with council members, particularly those council committee chairs where these process owners report into, advice from the mayor's office, and advice from just some of the work that we've been doing across departments and working in some of these areas. So it's a very collaborative effort to both put together the list of people and to bring them to the table. At this point, we're anticipating, I think I had numbers in here initially, as far as numbers of folks, around, I'm going to move to the, hang on just a second. So around, for instance, our housing policy area, we're expecting to engage. We've invited about 35 people as far as external partners to come participate in those sessions. Around public safety, there's about 45 people that are on the list, and in economic development, about 34 people estimated on this list. Any questions about the community engagement piece before I move on to kind of the nuts and bolts for the operationalizing process? All right.
No questions.
Okay. So similarly to the process that we use for our enterprise operational areas, for each of the focus areas, we're using what was formerly called a metric of urgency process. They've rebranded it, but the process is essentially the same. Bringing together the key stakeholders who understand the process, looking at and understanding how we actually look inside of the process, understanding how the process is actually operating today, identifying key metrics that we can use to measure progress, both at the beginning and then at the end of the process and along the way, and then isolating out the key activities that we need to be adjusting in order to get a better impact. That's really the goal of these metric of urgency sessions. So we have metric of urgency sessions scheduled for housing, around housing, public safety, and economic development. I've identified here who the process owners are within the city. These are the departments and divisions within departments that are playing a key role in helping bring together, again, those stakeholders that we identified, helping us understand how these processes are working today, helping us understand a lot of the work that's happening today, so that through these engagements and these two-day engagements, we're able to not necessarily create a new body of work for staff to be doing and for our partners to be doing, but to really be able to isolate the maximum opportunity inside of the work that we have in front of us.
Excuse me, Ms. Stevens, there is a question from Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I am curious, I want to try to say this as gently as possible. So I guess I might have some concerns with departments that maybe have caused the disparities owning the process. Okay. And so as council members, will we also be a part of these conversations? Because I have some concerns with folks owning the process that have caused the disparities in the first place and are perpetuating them in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. So Chair Jenkins, Councilman Cunningham, we're sharing these dates and the timing for the meeting. We'll make sure that you're having this information available, because we do anticipate, because of the nature of these areas, that there will be participation from council and likely from the mayor's office. We anticipate that that will be the case. So yes, is the short answer to your question.
Great, thanks. I just want to make sure that we're not operationalizing these priorities within the status quo is essentially kind of where I want to make sure that we are able, as policymakers, push to think differently and deeper. So thank you so much.
Chair Jenkins, Councilman Cunningham, and again, recognizing that the work that's happening with staff ultimately comes back to this body to approve the final strategic direction that comes out of this work, and the similar path that we took with the enterprise operational areas. We had direction to look at some key areas around data, spend, engagement, and workforce. Staff went away, went through a very similar process as the one that we're rolling out for these external areas, and ultimately brought those strategic needs back to council to say yes. The same thing will happen here. But as far as engagement in the actual meetings, absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure. So these are the dates that we have currently planned for the sessions now. Those dates begin in early April and extend through the month of May. Again, these are the meetings where we're doing more of that collaborative engagement with our key stakeholders from community. We're also engaging our Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee under the resolution that formed that group. They have a very key role in helping to shape the Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan, and so they are also positioning themselves to be involved in this process in some way. So both those individuals, the key stakeholders who are doing work, people from within our staff departments, and likely, as I mentioned, we expect that there would likely be some participation among council and the mayor's office as well in some of these sessions.
Excuse me, Ms. Stevens, have locations been determined for these
Yes.
events?
Yes, we do have locations for all of the events. I didn't put them on the slide, but we do have locations identified for them. And we'll make sure that you all have that information.
Thank you.
And not because we're trying to necessarily be secretive about where they are, but also recognizing that the nature of these meetings is unlike more of a general community engagement session where it's kind of a come one, come all. We really are looking, it's ideal for individuals who are coming to these sessions to really be individuals who are deeply rooted into the work, who understand the data and the processes surrounding some of these topics. They're not going to be the forum to come in for general educational purposes and to be informed. We're planning a parallel set of engagement that helps individuals who are just curious about what we're doing and want to learn more about what we're doing to have an opportunity to share their voice and contribute in that way.
Okay. We have a question from Councilmember Gordon.
Maybe it's a question or a suggestion. I think it will be important for, as the plan to operationalize these comes forward, that it also gets vetted through the appropriate council committees. And I also know that, at least in the housing area, I happen to chair that committee, there's also a housing advisory committee there as well that'll be very interested in evictions and what we're doing. And so let's make sure to save some time so that that can come up to that level whenever it's ready.
Chair Jenkins, Councilmember Gordon, on the next slide, I'm going to share some tentative dates that we're imagining to bring information back to this body, but that, again, those are tentative dates. So as to your point, if there are other places of engagement and of sharing information along the way with different boards and commissions, other council committees, please let us know, because again, like I said, those dates are tentative and we do have time to shape what some of that looks like. I would just offer that the timing of those on the next slide you'll see is really based on when these initial 2-day sessions are happening. We'll have more information at the close of the second day, for example, than after the first day, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. So as I mentioned, we have some tentative dates that we've identified for bringing information back to the Committee of the Whole. Again, based on when those 2-day sessions are planned to wrap, with an initial conversation back on May 15th around where we've landed with housing and economic development, following up with June 5th with a public safety strategic need, and then targeting a mid-June for the final wrap of the entire Strategic and Racial Equity Action Plan. That plan includes all of the different areas that you've already talked about along the way with the enterprise operational goals, the mission, vision, values that we've talked about today, and then these external policy areas, both around metrics as well as around high-level activities that we're expecting to be able to do as staff to actually implement the plan. And that's it.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments? Are there any questions or comments? You know, I too want to just acknowledge and thank the staff, the coordinator's office, Ms. Larson, Ms. Marsh Stevens, and all of the people, including my colleagues, who have worked really, really hard over a very, very long period of time to bring this sort of new process of strategic planning that includes our Race Equity Action Plan, which is a very new and I think innovative process that really embeds our principles and concerns about race equity into our strategic work that we have laid out for ourselves over the next the rest of this term. I believe that the goals that we have identified very relevant and strong and powerful, as well as the mission and our values and our vision. And so thank you all for doing this important work, and thanks to my colleagues for participating. And with that said, I would move this item for approval. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak on the motion, and I also appreciate all the work that we put into developing a new vision and mission and new values. I think that it's significant. I think it's easy to look at it and it looks like it's a bunch of words and oh well, ho hum. It's some icing on some cake or something. But if you actually dig into that, this mission and this vision is very different from what we've done in the past. In fact, there was no mission statement in the past. This mission statement focuses us right in on what we want to do, the actions that we want to take. It lays out there some pretty high goals and things that we want to address. I think that it's significant that we are focusing so much on racial equity and the disparities that we want to work on. That's going to be a nice marker for people to look back in a few years and see if we've actually done any good, including ourselves, but including the people of Minneapolis. And I think the vision that we have, statement that we have there is very powerful. I think it calls on us as individuals here and as the city staff and everybody to care about how well each individual in our city is doing. And as we approach all the interactions that we have with anybody, maybe we can keep in mind that we are also concerned about the individual before us for whatever reason we're having those interactions, and that we want to see their success and make it so that they can care about their community and the social well-being and environmental sustainability. And not only are we concerned there, but I really appreciate that we're saying that as we're focused on the immediate day-to-day work that we're doing, we're also thinking of the success of those future generations. I actually think that's a vision statement that I'll be proud to see as a banner on the website when I open it and look at it, and it will be a guide for me moving forward. And I'm proud of us for the work that we did. I know that we had some trouble. We, at one point, were thinking we might actually get love in our vision statement. Okay. We have compassionate, though, and we're intentionally compassionate. I think that's significant. We also talked about whether race belongs there or not, and we now have racial, I don't have it in front of me. I want to say injustice, disparities. Thank you. Right there. And I think that's significant, and that's definitely a first for our city here. So I'm proud of the work that we did and the patience everybody had with us to bring these forward. And now I think we have something to run with, including that list of values now that we can help guide the work that we're doing here as well. So thank you. And I also want to thank the staff for being patient with us as a group here, and myself for being pretty patient, because if you recall, I was hoping we'd have this done in last April or something, and as soon as we got the new people here, we could refresh it all, but maybe it's even better because we waited, and so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano, did you have comments?
No, I was waiting to you for him.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say that I am really excited about what we have here. I think that we really have a strong document that really reflects our shared values, our shared vision, what motivates us to come to work every day and put in all the hours and the time. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've produced here alongside staff. So thank you all very much for your leadership in this as well. I do have a question, and this is a little bit of like the next step beyond this. I'm curious, have we thought yet about like what does accountability look like within this? Because one of the challenges that I have is that I have had departments tell me that they don't have the capacity or time to focus on these things in my ward or the north side, where it's predominantly people of color. And so I guess I'm just curious, like, have we thought about what does accountability look like in this context? And yeah, I guess that's the long and short of it.
Chair Jenkins, Councilman Cunningham. So yes, we are definitely thinking about what does accountability look like and what does governance look like around the work. We do anticipate that, like a lot of department planning, that this work will ultimately end up as part of department operational plans. Because the nature of the process is really about helping to isolate and narrow the focus so that we're not doing 100 things and being able to figure out what are the 2 to 3 things I could be doing in order to actually get to the objective, that the hope is that it helps us narrow the work so that it's not new things that we're adding into our work plan within departments, but really helping to provide the data and the information that departments need to reprioritize how they're focusing their work. That is the ultimate goal of it. We're certainly seeing that play out in, for example, the work that's happening with workforce and human resources.
Chair Jenkins, Councilmember Cunningham. I'll also jump in and say that, as Joy mentioned, we're exploring ways to incorporate this into department planning. In the past, we've had department business plans, and we're rethinking what that process looks like. With this, this is just a very different kind of goals and priorities, and so we're assessing what that is going to look like. And then in our core work team, we have Joy and myself, and then Micah Intermel. With the budget office and Heather Worthington, and they are included, Heather to make sure that we're thinking about this in terms of long range planning, and Micah to help make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to these priorities and this process as we write our budget, which is another really important strategic process and document for us. And so, and then in our office, we're thinking about how this ties into Results Minneapolis and how we track our accountability in the current service levels that we report on through that mechanism. So there's sort of a lot of different ways that we're looking at accountability specific to these goals.
Great, thank you. I just think, Madam Chair, if I may, I just think that it's really necessary for us as policymakers and elected officials to make sure that we are really pushing to break the status quo of who is considered convenient and who is considered deserving, because the North Side, to be able to address the disparities, like, we really have to rethink of like who is considered convenient. And I think that there has been a lack of motivation from some departments with putting that extra energy into it because they have to operate differently. And so I just want to ask my colleagues to help hold that for those of us who represent areas that are predominantly people of color, that our communities are not considered convenient or deserving historically. And so to disrupt that status quo, that really is something that we have to think about when we talk about reorganizing the way that we do business, and also asking, like, are the right folks in those positions to be able to have the skill sets to move beyond who is considered convenient. So just wanted to name that because I see this, it's really great, and also, like, I have not seen that entirely reflected and have some concerns that we won't have the mechanisms in place to be able to hold folks accountable for not disrupting that status quo. So thank you all again for your work. That's not a reflection at all of this. It's just thinking big picture, how do we actually operationalize it and hold folks accountable? So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. So we have a motion before us for approval of this item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. And that item carries. And again, thank you all so much for guiding us through this really important process. Our next discussion item number 2, is an update on the Cultural Districts Work Group, which was established last year during discussion of the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And I will invite our city coordinator, Ms. Maria Rivera Vandermeid, to give that presentation.
Thank you, Chair Jenkins. I note that I am here in lieu of, my name is Maria Rivera Vandermeid, I'm the city coordinator. I am here in lieu of Danielle Shelton-Wajak, who is, along with our lovely colleague, Letta Schuster, who we stole from Councilmember Cano's office to work on this work. They really have been leading this in our office. My colleague is not feeling well today, but I'm sure she's watching to make sure I don't mess up her lovely presentation. The cultural districts work, and I actually really appreciate the conversation you just had about SREAP and how we are changing the way in which the city does its business, because I think this is another way in which that ties into. I appreciate the efforts that staff has made to really rethink the manner in which we actually now start to prioritize and bring about priorities so that we can actually see how we're moving the dial, conversations about accountability, and frankly, and I appreciate Councilmember Palmisano's leadership on this, how we're realigning budget and results to really do that. This is another shift in how we think about that as well. It really brings into mind how do we engage community and how do we co-create and get ideas together about something that is so essential, and really at the core of it recognizes our racial equity efforts, but also our needs to really think about economic drivers and how do we define that differently as we think about that. So as we think about cultural district, this is an idea, and these are conversations that had been started a while ago. I know that Councilmember Cano has been leading on this for many years, and there had been a first meeting with community stakeholders in October 22nd of 2018. The mayor was involved, Council Vice President Jenkins were involved, and Council Members Cano and Ellison were there to really host that meeting. There are about 30 community leaders represented, and there was really an affirmation that we wanted to take a look at how do we think of economic development through this lens of supporting and lifting up our cultural communities in terms of what does that look like. As that also came into fruition, and we were talking about that with you and your colleagues, with the comp plan, there was an adoption of what cultural districts looks like. And in that, it really speaks to a contiguous area with a rich sense of cultural and/or linguistic identity, rooted in communities significantly populated by people of color, indigenous people, and/or immigrants. So again, this is a call in our documents about looking at cultural districts and seeing where we can prioritize the work to lift up our cultural communities in different ways. As we think about what that really translates to, there was a vision of cultural districts that really spoke about three main elements, which was stimulating, elevating, and preservation. Stimulating economic development through policies, practices, and resources, and there were three main areas where that was going to take place at: economic development, public housing, and certainly we know that we've had a lot of conversations about affordable housing. We wanted to make sure that the cultural identity of POCII communities was lifted up. And really importantly, and I know this is a topic that concerns all of you, is how do we preserve neighborhoods from gentrification? And as we're making investments in community, we are not inadvertently driving people out of the very communities that we're trying to lift up. There was a staff direction that was associated with our budget process by Councilmember Cano. I won't read it all, but I'll say that one of the reasons that we are back here today is precisely that bolded topic bullet at the end that says it really tasked us, the city coordinator's office, in conjunction with CPED, to convene a cultural districts work group comprised of a variety of stakeholders, including community stakeholders, and asked to update on where we were, what initial framework, and come back in Q1. So we're a couple days past Q1, but we're actually still in. So we have just made it. That cultural districts work group is comprised of the folks that you see here, although I will say that while we call out some of our elected officials that have been most closely to it, I will say that that by no means mean that there haven't been other council members who have been part of this. I know council members Warsami, Councilmember Cunningham, Councilmember Reich, others have been talking about how do we get plugged in, how do we continue to move. I know that Councilmember Cano sent a note out to colleagues to see how do we continue to make sure that if you are interested and have capacity to plug into this work, where can we do that? We've got a variety of city staff. As I mentioned, Danielle and Leda in our office are leading that from our perspective. Heather Worthington is the person who is point from CPED. Sean Pierce in the mayor's office has been very active in our work. Brett Jelly in Public Works has been working on it, and I know that various of your aides have been going to having some of these conversations as well. Importantly, however, I'll highlight the community stakeholders that you see listed here, and I presume that that will continue to grow. But one of the reasons I highlight that is to say that this work has to be grounded, and we heard that loud and clear in October. We heard that at a recent convening, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. That really whatever comes from this has to be rooted in community and the people who are experiencing and know their community and their cultural identity best. So there was a recent convening in just last week about this work group where the work group and community stakeholders were there. In that, there were 3 committees that were designated as that looked forward, and it was really split out into small work groups to talk about the why, the who, and the how, which is how do we designate a cultural district, what elements go into that, what is the geography. We are no longer talking about, like we've done in the past years, about cultural corridors, where it's really about a continuous area, but thinking about cultural districts because they're closely aligned, but they may not be on one specific street. And thinking about what that looks like, also wanting to overlay that against some of the other things that we're talking about, whether it's the maps that we have on racially concentrated areas of poverty, or whether it's about the promise zone or opportunity zones, really thinking about what those focus is, what that focus will be. There was another group that really talked about, and they've asked us to change. We originally had what are the needs, and we really respect the fact that that group said it's not about needs because that starts us at a place of deficit, but really about what are the resources and opportunities as we think about looking at cultural districts. And again, that notion of whatever the recommendations that come forward should reflect and are based on the experience of the people that live, work, and play there is really important, and making sure that it actually fits in and is supporting what the city council has already approved in the comprehensive plan, small area plans, land use, so that we can really leverage things that have already been approved and where we're going as a city. And then finally, there was a group on narrative and marketing, and this is a key story. I believe it has been something that we've heard from you, we have heard from community and other conversations. How do we tell this story and how do we brand it? It has been conversations we've been having with Meet Minneapolis, for example, on expanding their breadth from to include what they do a great job in downtown, but also think about what does that look like for neighborhoods. But how do we come up with a communication strategy that really talks about cultural corridors in ways that is inviting, that is welcoming, that is iconic, that really strikes that authentic vision of what cultural districts are going to be as we move forward. So going back to that initial work group feedback, some of the items that we heard back from, and again, this just happened last week, was in the stimulate and preserve, really talk about ownership. Who owns some of the property, some of the land, some of the businesses, and how do we move forward? How do we think about community reinvestment? And so there is a lot of conversation about how do we allocate resources and how do we reinvest some of that and how do we get some of our private and philanthropic and cooperative partners involved in that. Where do we look at and can we have a real candid conversation on whether inadvertently or not, whether our current policies serve as barriers? And let's look at that and see what does that mean? What can we think about? There certainly has been talk about best practices, and this group will be looking at what that looks like. There has been conversations about how do we as a city ask for permitting fees, for example, and that is something to be looked at. That has financial repercussions for the city, so it is not a conversation to be taken lightly, but really, again, that's an example of looking at current policies and thinking about where does that land. We also wanted to think about how do we tell that story and elevate and acknowledge that our city is changing, that where perhaps in years past we thought of Lake Street, for example, as the hub of Latino economic development, that we're starting to see that embrace additional cultures, and where does that look like, and how do we think about elevating and acknowledging our multiple richness of cultures that we have in the city as that moves forward, and thinking about the agility of being able to change that as we see those demographics grow and flow through the years and in the future. And then finally, this was another conversation that we had and that we heard loud and clear, and I know that the staff and the work teams are going to be continuing to work on, is what does the city need to provide? And so this clarity on what responsibilities or what roles there are, what resources are available, how do we make that clear? There are a lot of financial resources, for example, that our CPED department has, and how do we continue to make sure that community knows about them, accesses them, and where they don't work, that they're able to have a conversation about, this actually doesn't fit our need, can we think about that differently? And we have seen recently how CPED has been able to adapt to those requests as well. And really importantly, trying to root this in data, which is part of what we're trying to do for all our work, and think about a timeline and benchmarking so we can always make sure that we are coming back and that we've got not just the passion for wanting to put a cultural corridor together, but really the data behind and why this isn't a good economic driver. We've got a few next steps. On April 15th, city staff is going to be debriefing. They have not been able to quite yet from last meeting and taken all the information that was given. It was a rich conversation. I unfortunately was not able to be there, but heard tremendous feedback from the folks who were there, that it was really rich in content and just in really good dialogue. We want to be able to provide some materials and changes to subcommittees. Those subcommittees agreed to meet again before our May 13th next work group meeting. And some of them will be meeting once, some of them will be meeting twice. And so city staff has committed to coming back and responding to whatever documents they need or whatever additional resources they need. And then we hope to update council again with a more formal work plan in June. And so we will be working through Councilmember Cano and Chair Jenkins to think about what the next presentation looks like as we move through. I'm sure I have missed some details, and happy if there are additional questions, whether it's Councilmember Cano or others who were at that meeting, but certainly my colleague Lada can answer some questions as well. But with that, I'll stand.
Wow, thank you, Ms. Rivera Vandermeer, and for that update on cultural districts. Are there any questions or comments? Any questions? You know, I want to take an opportunity to really, well, I think I first heard about this term cultural districts in 2015 when I worked as a policy aide with former council member Glidden, and Councilmember Cano and Council members Lilligren brought this idea forward, and Councilmember Cano has been consistently sounding the horn and championing this idea through this term, and we pulled together a really, I think, amazing group of community members along some of these, what I call sort of naturally occurring cultural corridors, but to get together to think about how do we formalize, how do we target resources, how do we hold the city accountable, to Councilmember Cunningham's point around the strategic race equity action plan, how do we hold people accountable? And I think cultural districts is one tool to help us to move economic inclusion forward, but being really mindful and thoughtful and intentional about not creating displacement, but lifting up those people in those communities to be able to participate in the revitalization of those communities and really help us to inform, I think, the identity, the structure, the historical context of these cultural districts that are really important. And I think one of the things that you talked about, Naria, around what are the resources and what are the things that the city can do to support these efforts. And so those are going to be some of the topics that we talk about as this work continues moving forward. I do want to encourage and invite my other colleagues to get involved in this work. It really is a powerful, I think, tool to really, and again, some of these communities already are in what we might think of as cultural districts, but again, I think all of us can benefit, participate. I think about the work that's happening on Franklin with the Native American Community Development Institute and all the Native American organizations along that corridor. But again, we need to step in as a city to help lift that work up and create awareness and opportunities to continue to grow. So I want to invite Councilmember Cano to comment as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And thank you to staff for bringing forward this report on a timely manner. We were really focused on making sure that we didn't miss that deadline, because we know that it's so important to keep everything else on track. So it's true that, when I was working for then Council Vice President Robert Lilligren, the notion of cultural corridors was introduced as a community-based approach to allow the Indigenous community to be the leader of development conversations on Franklin Avenue. And at the time, I learned about all of the barriers that the city presented in having them complete that vision. And so this is sort of a full circle work to be able to respond to some of those ideas and neighborhood-based needs, as well as opportunities and resources, as it was so well re-articulated or reframed at the last meeting. There is definitely a sense from community stakeholders that this framework shouldn't be a deficit-based framework, but that it should recognize all of the assets and richness in not only social capital, but economic capital that communities of color, Indigenous communities, and immigrant communities have brought to the table. So throughout those years, many times I tried to figure out how to get this project going forward, and at the time, CPED had advised making sure that this project lived within the comprehensive plan. And so it took a while to get there, and finally we are here. The now is here, and we're forming the structure of how this will live within the enterprise. So I do invite any one of our colleagues who wants to be a part of that to plug into the work via Danielle Shelton-Walzek. She can plug you into the invites and to the bi-weekly work meetings that we have internally, and to the quarterly stakeholder meetings, which are also open to the public. And so that's one thing that we decided, is that these community stakeholder convenings are open to any stakeholder that wants to be a part of the conversation. What's not debatable is the point that this will prioritize communities of color, and it'll prioritize an anti-displacement lens. And so while the rest of the items that come with this, such as what will the ordinance look like, what will the programming look like, what will the investment look like, all of those things are still obviously going to be hashed out throughout the year, and perhaps next year as well. We do know that there's specific priorities because this project is a racial equity project in its core. So I do want to thank all of the council members who have been involved so far. I look forward to continuing this as a team effort. Staff have done a beautiful job of putting it together and bringing folks throughout the enterprise in unison to bring this conversation forward. We will need more support because when we opened it up to any community stakeholder to join us at those quarterly meetings, we know that's going to take more resources and more staff support. So I just want to be really clear-eyed about that keeping it sort of by invite only and sort of a closed and encapsulated project limits the resources and time, but then if you open it up, then it expands the resources and time. So We just have to have a reality sort of check convo on that to be able to sustain that energy. I do want to acknowledge the mayor's office, and I see that Sean Pierce is in the room here today. Thank you for being a part of this presentation as well. Your expertise are very important in this project, and you've been able to carry this throughout the months that we've been doing this now. Last year, when we began discussing this. So I'll just be quiet now and let us move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cano. And before we vote, I do want to just acknowledge and lift up the leadership of Councilmember Ellison as well, who has been deeply engaged in this work and bringing his creativity and leadership to this effort. And I'm glad you acknowledged the mayor's office. They have been very instrumental in moving this work forward as well. So if there are no other comments or questions, I will move to receive and file this update. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. And that item carries. And our last item for discussion is a resolution recognizing the 2020 census. And I see we have Ms. Alberta Gillespie, is it, in the audience? Would you like to come and talk a little bit about the work that you're doing, and then I can read the resolution for adoption?
Thank you, Chair Jenkins. I was actually not prepared to speak, but I will do so. The resolution is about the census.
Can you introduce yourself to the
I'm sorry. I'm
body?
Alberta Gillespie, and I'm currently the 2020 Census Project Coordinator for the census. So, and we are having our kickoff on April 1st, and we're really excited about that. And it's a community partnership kickoff, and so we will have community activists and leaders and organizers come together to talk about how we can make sure that our hard-to-count populations are included in the 2020 census. And so we're excited about this event.
And where's the kickoff?
It's actually going to be at the Center for Changing Lives, which is 2400 Park Avenue. Starts at 5:30 and goes until 7:30.
Wonderful.
So it should be a really great event.
Awesome. And so we want to have this resolution for the kickoff of that event, resolution of the City of Minneapolis. Whereas the U.S. Census Bureau is required by Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution to conduct an accurate count of the population every 10 years. And whereas the next enumeration will be April 1st, 2020, 2020, we will be the first to rely heavily on online responses. And whereas these diverse communities and demographic populations are at risk of being missed in the 2020 census, and whereas a complete and accurate count of Minneapolis's population is essential, and whereas the data collected by the decennial census, census determines the number of seats each state has in the United States House of Representatives and is used to distribute billions of dollars in federal funds to state and local governments. And I will note that we are in jeopardy of losing a seat here in the state of Minnesota if our counts are not complete, which would mean a loss of millions and millions of dollars of federal support. Whereas data is also used in redistricting of state legislators, county boards of supervisors, and city councils, and whereas the decennial census is a massive undertaking that requires cross-sector collaboration and partnerships in order to achieve a complete and accurate count. And whereas the theme of Minneapolis U.S. Census campaign is "We Count," And whereas Minneapolis leaders have dedicated funding and resources to ensure every Minneapolis resident is counted, and whereas Minneapolis is kicking off its outreach and engagement efforts on April 1st, 2019 for the 2020 census, and whereas Minneapolis, in partnership with other local governments, the state, businesses, schools, and community organizations, is committed to robust outreach and communication strategies focusing on reaching the historically undercounted individuals and communities. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Minneapolis recognizes the importance of the 2020 United States Census and acknowledges April 1st, 2019 as the kickoff of our city's efforts to ensure a complete, fair, and accurate account. Thank you. And so with that, looking forward to a really great event on April 1st, and hopefully my colleagues can participate in that event. And we will finally now receive reports from the standing committees on matters to be considered by the full council at our regularly scheduled meeting this coming Friday. And we will begin with the Economic Development and Regulatory Services Committee. And I do want to let the record reflect that Council Member Goodman and Warsami has joined us at this meeting, and Council Member Goodman will give that report.
Thank you, Madam President. I have 1 minute and 30 seconds to agenda setting, so I'll be really quick. Item number 1 is approval of a liquor license for Flaming Thai Cuisine at 233 Cedar. Item number 2 is making some changes in the rental dwelling license expiration date so that it will be easier for people who have rental licenses to know when they will expire at a specific time. Item 3 are the liquor license approvals. 4 are the liquor license renewals. 5 are the business license operating conditions for Adams Tobacco Shop, and 6 are business license operating conditions for Winners Gas, both on the north side. Item 7 is a bus shelter license agreement with the Met Council to put a new bus shelter at 30 West Lake Street. And item number 8 is an application to the state's deed office for a Youth at Work competitive grant. I'm happy to answer questions on this agenda, and I have to go with Councilmember Ellison to agenda setting.
Are there any questions for Councilmember Goodman? Seeing none, we will move to our next committee report. The Elections and Rules Committee. I'm assuming Councilmember Ellison is going to stay and give that report.
Thank you, Vice President Jenkins. The Elections and Rules Committee has one item, which is the appointment of the Assistant City Clerk, the awesome Jackie Hansen, and I will stand for any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will move to the next committee report, the Housing Policy and Development Committee, given by the Chair, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. The Housing Policy and Development Committee is bringing forward 5 items. The first item is consideration of project analysis authorization for the Seward Commons Phase 3. We had a small committee. There were 4 of us there. We were deadlocked on this issue, so it's coming forward without recommendation. It was 2-2 vote. Second item is came forward with recommendation for project analysis authorization for 14th and Central Mixed-Use Development. Third item is adopting a Housing Policy and Development Committee work plan. I'll be bringing forward a minor amendment to that on Friday. Fourth item is adopting the interim inclusionary zoning tax increment financing policy, and I understand that I've been requested to delay that one cycle, so I'll move a delay for that one cycle on Friday. And the fifth is adopting an updated public financial assistance fee policy to assist the city in recovering costs related to provision of public financial assistance to support development activity. I'm happy to stand for questions on any of those.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Are there any questions or comments on that report?
So maybe I could make a brief comment. I wonder if Councilmember Warsami might want to also weigh in on the Seward Commons issue. This is something that came forward to us with staff recommendation, and I know that people who aren't on the committee won't be as aware of this project as those on the committee are. but this is a large redevelopment project. It's a multi-phase project that actually the city signed an agreement with the development on for in 2009. So it's was redevelopment of a large polluted industrial site near the Blue Line Franklin Station. They've already completed 2 phases. If this third phase is completed, the overall project will deliver 132 units of affordable housing out of a 260 total. So a blended redevelopment project will bring in over 50% of affordable units. 100 of those are actually affordable for folks at 30% of AMI or below, and that includes 40 units of supportive housing. I think this is exactly the kind of projects that we want in our city, and these were embraced by the community and supported all the 2 previous phases and this phase as well. I know that there's been some discussion about what all this is and whether or not this meets city policy. I believe that it does meet city policy, and I can talk more about this on Friday if we do have debate about it, but I'll just read this one section and then happy to have more discussion if folks want to, but you might also be in a hurry. But from our unified housing policy, it's pretty clear that these kind of projects are an appropriate use of tax increment financing. It says, I quote, large redevelopment projects that include more than one building or phase can meet this requirement, that's the affordable housing requirement, on a blended basis so that the total affordable housing units developed within the project area is at least 20% of the total housing units produced. And then it says, however, city financial assistance will only be considered to support buildings or phases that include affordable housing. While they have come in with a phase 3 that includes 2 buildings, and 20% out of those 2 buildings will be affordable. This is an opportunity for us to finally get some redevelopment, more redevelopment by the light rail station, and it's consistent with our city policies. And I'll be making the case that we should support this on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Are there comments? Councilmember Warsami.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, and echoing Council Member Gordon's sentiment, I'm very supportive of this project. It's a complicated project. It started a long time before I was on the council. I think Council Member Gordon represented the area when the first agreement was signed. However, I just had a tour of the mental health institute there, the housing there, and it's fantastic, and we need this kind of development. And also, it's very unique to our ward because the Seward neighborhood hasn't had any market rate development for nearly 40 years. So this is an interesting development, and it's really supported by the community as well. And I would like my colleagues to support it. The complexity that it has, we would need some staff support on Friday to explain how the third phase is kind of tying. But there is a fourth phase development that, if you add to the third phase development, would actually address the 20% affordability. So it's complicated, but it's very supported by the community, and it's unique to the area because the area's needs are unique as well. So I'd like my colleagues to have an open mind and support this project. So thank you.
Next in queue is Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the complex nature of this issue and that it's been a project staged over a very long period of time. I'm not on this committee, but I did want to point out to my colleagues that the 2 people that voted against this measure, Council President Bender and Councilmember Goodman, aren't here to share their side of this complicated story at Committee of the Whole, and I would just urge my colleagues to check in with them also and to allow them to have a voice in this conversation. Because there is a lot of potentially precedent-setting things that we're doing here. And I'm super glad that it's supported by the community, and it's also a big step for the city. So how that gets reconciled seems like it would take a forthcoming conversation from both of those parties. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Are there other thoughts, questions, comments? Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that I will be supporting this project, and this project has been in the queue for many, many, many years, and it's in an area of the city where it's hard to get the free market to function well. So I support the staff-led concept, and it's hard actually sometimes to find projects like this that are supported by both staff, the chair of the committee, the council member that whose ward it's in. So I don't see any huge red flags here. In fact, this kind of activity likely lines up with the notion of what a cultural district work should look like in terms of supporting and aiding mixed-use housing. And I will say that I've heard some maybe concerns or rumors about how this project might dilute the amount of affordable housing in the area. I just want to remind folks that a half block away from where this is proposed, you have the Navigation Center, which is what I would say, a city provision of extra affordable housing in terms of trying to support the folks who are unsheltered and folks who are experiencing homelessness. So I just want us to think about sort of the bigger picture as we're looking at this approach at this project, and to acknowledge the hard work that's gone into this, both by staff and by the neighborhood and area residents, as well as the council members who have been working on this for more than 7 years.
Are there any other comments, questions? Seeing none, we will move to the next committee report, the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee, given by its chair, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee will be bringing forward 4 items for our council meeting on Friday. The first is passage of a resolution supporting Earth Hour 2019, which is Saturday, March 30th from 8:30 until 9:30 p.m. The second is confirming a mayoral reappointment for the Public Health Advisory Committee. Number 3 is the passage of resolution amending the Southside Green Zone Council by adding 4 youth ambassador members, as well as a second item within that, approving a slew of council appointments for the Southside Green Zone. And item number 4 is approving council and mayoral appointments to the Violence Prevention Steering Committee. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will move to the next committee report, the Transportation and Public Works Committee, given by Chair Wright.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The committee will be forwarding 18 items for consideration by full council. Item 1 and 2 are residential street resurfacing projects for the areas designated. Item 3 is the PV Plaza ordinance. Items 4 and 5 are agreements for the Bassett Creek watershed and the Conservancy for tree planting. Items 6 and 7 are contract amendments for activities of the department. Item 8 is the regulation of infrastructure and their attachments within the city-managed public right-of-way. Item 9 is the affirmation of the 2018 Minnesota Safe Routes to School. Item 10 is the Washington Avenue Streetscape Project, and that goes from Hennepin Avenue to 5th Avenue South. Item 11 is the Portland Avenue County Cooperative Project layout approval. Item 12 is the Minnesota State Aid System revisions. Item 13 is the capital project closeouts and appropriations as listed. And items 14 through 18 are bids for standard activities, seasonal activities of the department. Madam Vice President, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Wright. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none, our next committee report is the Ways and Means Committee, given by Chair Rorsami.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Ways and Means Committee brings 18 items for the Council's full consideration. Item number 1 is a contract with Green Minneapolis for operation, maintenance, and programming of PV Plaza. Item number 2 is a transfer of operation, maintenance, and programming of downtown East Commons to Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. Item number 3 is a contract amendment with Morgan Constructions, Inc. for Convention Center Kitchen and Ductwork Replacement Project. Item number 4 is a contract amendment with Danny's Construction Company, LLC for structural steel installation modification for public service building project. Item number 5 is a contract amendment with Lejeune Steel Company for additional structural steel material supply for the public service building project. Item number 6 is a contract amendment with Cunningham Construction Services, Inc. for concrete superstructure changes for the public service building. Item number 7 is a contract amendment with Spec 7 Group LLC for additional waterproofing for the public service building project. Item number 8 is a contract amendment with Kevitt Companies for minor scope of work changes for the public service building project. Item number 9 is a capital long-range improvement committee appointments. Item number 10 is an internal loans in lieu of issuing refunding bonds for the Milwaukee Depot development, the Humboldt Greenway development, the West Side Milling development, and general obligation refunding bonds. Item number 11 is an appointed position in the police department, and this is for the Chief of Staff of Minneapolis Police Department. Item number 12 is a 2019 politically appointed employee salary schedule. Item number 13 is 2019 non-represented employees salary schedule. Item number 14 is a collective bargaining agreement, and this is for the firefighters unit. This starts 2019 through to 2021. Item number 15 is another collective bargaining agreement, and this is for the electrical technicians unit, and this is from 2019 through to 2021. Item number 16 is the grant application to the United States Economic Development Administration for economic recovery assistance for the Minneapolis Promise Zone. Item number 17 is a local government amicus brief in state of California. Item number 18 is a contract with Association for Black Economic Power for provision of banking services and financial literacy education for Minneapolis residents. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chair Rosami. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will move to the next committee report, the Zoning and Planning Committee, given by Chair Schrader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Zoning and Planning Committee will be bringing forward 2 items for approval on Friday. The first is the confirming of 2 reappointments to the City Planning Commission, and the second is the acceptance of a gift from the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chair Schrader. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Seeing none, I just want to apologize to my colleagues. I failed to receive approval of the 2020 census resolution, and so I would like to move that item for approval. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. That item carries. And seeing as there's no further business before this committee, we are now adjourned.